Hello and welcome back to Diving Deep with Deepak and Darrah. We are back with another question. We're going to spend a brief amount of time going deep to make it relatable and translatable into your life. And stay tuned to the very end where we're going to have a free bonus for you. Hello, Deepak. Today, my question for you is, money is paper to which we give meaning. What do you suggest is a healthy relationship with money?
The healthiest relationship with money is not to think about it. So if you have concerns about money, it doesn't matter how much money you have in your bank account. You basically have poverty consciousness because you're concerned about it and you're worried about it. So if you think about money all the time, then it will consume you. I know a lot of people who are multi-billionaires, and their pursuit is money, generating money to generate more money. So they basically have become experts in making money off money. And they've never had fun in their life. For example, I would like to ask them when's the last time they went to Guatemala like you did. Okay. And they don't have the time to do that. So here's my personal relationship with money, which I advise other people to follow if they want to. I don't force my opinions on anyone. And that is the following: that money is a means to an end. So the basic pursuit of humanity, by and large, is what they call happiness. Happiness is the goal of all goals. And so what they think, most people think, is if they have a good relationship, then they'll be happy. If they're healthy, then they'll be happy. If they make lots of money, they'll be happy. If they are the president of their company or CEO, they'll be happy. There's always a reason that they invoke in their mind to be happy. Now, happiness for a reason is actually misery, because the reason can be taken away from you. You know, you might have all the money in the world, but look at all the big businesses that have a life cycle. They don't even exist anymore. Nokia, and I can name many other big businesses like Kodak, for example. They don't even exist. And so that has a life cycle. Position has a life cycle, relationship has a life cycle, everything has a life cycle, money has a life cycle too. Furthermore, if you're making money to make money, then you're wasting your time because you'll never be able to use it. So find out in your heart, what would you do if you had all the money in the world, all the money, if there's no restriction, if it is without limits, and you also had all the time in the world. So if I take those as two basic assumptions, I have all the money in the world and I have all the time in the world. Now, how do I spend my time? And how does it help somebody? That is my purpose, that is my meaning, and that is my passion. That's my calling. And then you jump off the cliff in the hope that you will fly and not fall down and ultimately disappear when you land. That's a risk you have to take. But without risks or calculated risks, there is no enjoyment of life anyway. It becomes boring. It's not an adventure. Your relationship with money is your relationship with yourself.
It's really interesting. And now that you say that, I'm going to be calling my twin brother out. So hope he never sees this. But it's a conversation he and I have had for a long time, especially as business partners, where his goal was always more money, more money, more money. And
Who's this?
My twin brother.
I see.
And the question I always had for him was why? What is the thing that you are trying to achieve with money? What is money the tool to help you create? And he would always say to me, well, I don't know. I'll figure it out later. And I always felt that, much like your Guatemala point, if you're not living your life now, there is no guarantee for the future. And if you can't enjoy the fruits of your labor now, you're going to delay happiness until this when that never will come.
And by then, you might have rotten teeth, hypertension, inflammation, maybe sexual impotence, and you'll be spending all the money you earn to get better.
Exactly.
So you heard the story, of course, of the Mexican fisherman, right?
No, tell us.
Okay, so there's this Mexican fisherman who's in some little remote place in Mexico, and there's this American billionaire who's also has a fishing rod, and he says, "What do you do?" He asks the fisherman. He says, "I come here fishing. I catch 2 fish. One I take home to cook, the other I sell, and then I go to the village square and I play music, and I spend time with my friends, and we share poetry, and basically I hang out with my amigos." And he says, the American billionaire says, I can lend you some money, and instead of having this little fishing rod, you could get a boat. And then you could actually get, instead of sitting here, you could get more fish, and then you'd be able to sell more fish. And so then the fisherman says, "Then what will I do after that?" They said, "You can get a bigger boat." And he says, "What can I do after that?" He said, "I can get you a fleet of boats. Actually, I'm on Wall Street, and I can even create an IPO for you. And one day you can have a whole fleet, and you can be like me, a billionaire." And so the fisherman says, "Then what do I do?" And the billionaire says, "Well, then you can, hang out with your amigos, have a glass of wine, and have poetry in the evenings, and hang out in the village square." And this poor guy is already doing that.
I love it. It's the billionaire mindset doesn't require all of the putting things off until later. It really requires living in that richness right now.
Right. So abundance is a state of consciousness. Wealth is a state of consciousness. Poverty is a state of consciousness.
And it flows into so many areas. I always talk about the dichotomy between abundance and scarcity mentalities, and that shows up everywhere. If you look at competition and you look at what you don't have, but instead looking at what you actually do have instead of lamenting what's not, that plays out and it ripple effects into every arena of your life. And if you look closely, you can see it. And unfortunately, I think our culture perpetuates that model of scarcity. So the more we can put ourselves in abundance mindset, the more we can have this rich life, both probably literally as well as mentally, which is the most important.
Correct.
Wonderful. So we're going to move now into our second part where I'm going to ask you a random question. And I'm noticing that photo behind you. And I think there's an interesting story. Will you tell us about it?
Oh, the photo behind me, that's my parents. My father, who was a very famous cardiologist and an amazing humanitarian. And that's my mother. So, on weekends, my best memories are my father would see patients without charging them any money. My mother would cook food for them, and they would come from all over India by trains and buses. And then my mother would actually make sure that they had enough money, since you talked about money, for their train fare and for their bus. So that's how I grew up with abundance consciousness, because they had all that in their world. And that picture is taken when my mother was pregnant with my younger brother, who was until a few months ago the dean of Harvard Medical School Education and is now a professor. He's a long-term professor of medicine at Harvard Medical School.
So you come from a long line of underachievers.
I come from a long line of abundance consciousness.
Exactly. That was sarcasm. So I'm curious about your parents. What's the top thing you learned from each of them? What's the number one lesson you've taken away?
So, my mother was very, you might say, religious in the traditional sense. And in India, you have all these gods and goddesses. You mentioned Ganesh and Lakshmi, who I can show you. There is Lakshmi. It's behind me. See Lakshmi? Can you see her?
Yeah.
Can you see her?
Yes.
Okay, so Lakshmi is the goddess of abundance. And there are 2 other goddesses, Saraswati, the goddess of wisdom, and then the third one, Durga, who's the destroyer of ignorance, fierce. And this is what my mother would tell me. We think of these goddesses not as deities out there, but states of awareness in our own being. that are symbolically representing some motif or story or theme. So my mother would say every day to us, you should fall in love with the goddess of wisdom. And then you should also woo the goddess of wisdom and the goddess of destruction of ignorance. Ignore the goddess of abundance. But then, she's a woman, she'll get jealous. And she will then chase you and you won't be able to avoid her. So, I was 4 years old, I followed the advice. And sure enough, the goddess of abundance won't leave me alone now. She's everywhere I go. That's my mother's story. And my father's story was always doctors don't heal, they treat. Ultimately, healing occurs from within. And, those two themes have carried me throughout my life.
Beautiful. Well, thank you everyone for tuning in. This is another episode of Diving Deep with Deepak and Darrah. If you want to go deeper, we have a free 40-minute masterclass with Deepak and I on living a more meaningful life, along with a guided meditation. You can get that at the link here. It's lifebydesignsummit.com/Deepak. Also subscribe to our channels. We'll be updating more videos weekly. And lastly, feel free to follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Deepak Chopra and at Darrah B, where we will keep the abundance flowing. See you next time.